This is a 2018 feature, so anything that I say will be 2018. Once we get into the comfort and advanced, I'll let you know, but on the PowerPoint you'll also see at the top that it's comfort and advanced. So another feature that we have is the paintbrush fill tool. So what this allows us to do is, now if you have to designate an area, you can turn on the paintbrush tool and then simply draw a perimeter around where you want the selection to be, and it just automatically fills that. And it just makes the selection process a little bit easier because you don't have to color. Also, when you're doing this is more like could be like for a C-clamp where you're opening up the offset and you want to come in and mill from 90 degrees. So it's always best that when you're painting the surfaces, not to leave spaces in between the painted surfaces, because the tool will perform rapids because it's a zigzag type toolpath. So when it sees one circle here and one down below, and there's a gap in between, it has to jump up and come back down. So we're wasting time when that tool is in the air. So always keep your surfaces kind of continuous in terms of the flow. We also now display the secondary axis. So for example, whenever you import inlays, onlays, and veneers, we automatically detect the kind of the insertion direction of that. So the benefit of that is that as you rotate inlays, onlays, and veneers, we automatically change the direction from which we're going to come in and finish it. And we also cut the offset along that, so that way the tool has clearance to come in and mill it. So this is implementation now. When you click on that curve, you'll actually see the axis that it's going to machine from. These are some new buttons that are, let me see if I can get the focus a little bit better. That's about as good as we're going to get. So there's two buttons, copy and paste, which basically allows me to copy parameters in between different materials and restoration types. This is a settings for the support pins in Millbox. So if you're using 3Shape today, we can actually display the contact areas for occlusal and interproximal. There's an option to output this additional contact information, and it's just an additional PTS file that we can import. We don't have it in ExoCAD yet, but we have the request with ExoCAD. They haven't gotten around to doing it yet. So we're hoping to segue this into some way of, right now it doesn't affect the support pin placement. So we're hoping to maybe take that into account for the future. That's kind of the idea behind why we want it in the CAM. So also the benefit is, if you have a milling technician that doesn't have access to the CAD technician or doesn't know where the interproximals are, this is a good visual aid, so that way you know where to avoid placement of your support pins. We can also ignore additional CAD files. So if as a milling center, let's say that you constantly receive files with bad information from one or two customers, well, maybe it's so much of an issue that you just want to ignore the construction info in every case. You can go into the option, and under the object import, there is now the option to ignore those files. So it will only ever look at the STL file, and it ignores all the secondary information from the CAD. There's also a setting in the options. This is under the interface tab, but it allows the user to change wizard steps without confirming or without hitting X in between steps. So you can see I was on calculate. I can go to blank by clicking blank. I can go back to import object just by clicking import object. It's just more or less a faster workflow, a little bit easier. We have some new settings for the job report. So you can turn off the rendering of the STL file now, which is kind of cool because it saves a lot on ink. There was a lot of ink being wasted. So now it just shows a silhouette of where that margin curve was detected. You can also make that line bold, but I think that's a comfort feature. And then we also have the image overlay. So you can see the red crosshair that's there. This was a request by a large milling center that does thousands of units a day. It's easier for their technicians to have a quadrant on the paper, so that way they can just set the disc on and they know what cases are in which quadrant. It's a little bit easier to coordinate. So align the selected object to the Z-axis. So for example, if you're milling an interface and maybe your machine's having some slight inaccuracies on the 5-axis milling or something like that, you can always align it to the Z, so that way everything's parallel with the Z axis. Now you can do this for abutments. In this case, you see it's angulated. If I were to click that, it would snap that and make it parallel. So that way we can come in from an index position without rotating any axes, and we can get a really high accuracy result. Also, this could be useful for single crowns as well, because we also detect the insertion direction for those automatically. And what it will do is, by default, when you import a crown, we usually rotate it slightly to make it take up less space within the disc. So this will snap it back to make the insertion direction parallel with the axis, just like an abutment almost. Okay, this is pretty good for 4-axis machines. Mostly for 4-axis is what you would use this on. Of course, you're aware that we have the overstructure type. That's a 2018 feature that we implemented, new object type. Vertical pins, when we change the diameters on these, if you use these, most people don't, but if you change the diameter, it just remembers that from that point forward. So that's a update we did there. For RPDs, what we found when we were milling RPDs is some customers would forget to open up the offset, and even if you not open, but they would forget to increase the offset. So maybe by default on PMMA you use a 3mm offset, for example. Well, if you have clasps, what would tend to happen is in these areas here, the offset would come inside. So what we've done is, and what that does is it creates issues for clearance with the tool, because especially in these weak areas on the part, so you could potentially break a clasp, you could potentially break a tool. And so what we've done is we've come in here, and now we just draw the offset straight across whenever we detect these clasps. And that just gives the tool a little bit more clearance to get in there and cut, and it just gives us a little bit more higher accuracy, in my opinion, and better reliability. Element count. So you have we can now count how many units are in a particular part. We display that directly on the job report. If you want to edit your job report, you have a template file that you just open up, and this is the syntax that you would put in under the column that you want to display the number of elements, and then it would display on the report just like this. So you can see this is a 6-unit bridge, counting the conics, and displays as 6. Smart support pins. This is pretty new as well. I like this. In my opinion, personally, from what I've seen, I think it works probably better with titanium and chrome cobalt, like the metals for sure. You can use it on zirconia as well, but it's just a little bit more cleanup. The thing I like about it is now, and what you can see in the image, is that as we're placing this smart support pin, it's automatically morphing according to the equator curve, or the equator line. So in that way, we minimize the amount of undercuts that we're creating on the part. And this will hold on to the part a lot more strongly as well. So like PMMA and things like that, you can get away with less connectors overall by using this, because it's such a wide area that it's holding onto the part. It's a lot better in terms of anti-rotational, and it just holds the part very well. So information icon, it's just a new icon that we've added to where when you click on a part, this window that shows up at the top, you can click on the tools button here, and then you have the information icon where it just gives you the STL name and then how many elements there are inside of there. And then you have engraving of smart support pins. So here you can see what I was talking about. The shape of the smart support pin will be smaller as it gets closer to the part, and then it beefs up as it gets closer to the material. You can also now engrave on the support pin as well. So if you don't want to have to engrave on your part for any reason, you can still kind of keep track of it that way. So when you're cutting it out, if you're pre-sorting for shades, then you can do that very easily now. One thing important to mention: once you place engraving on this support pin, it locks the rotation of the part, and it also locks you can't move the support pin. You have to remove the engraving first before you can rotate it again. Okay. Shrinkage factor or enlargement factor. In the options, we've had the option to use percentage scaling factors for a long time now in Millbox. However, now depending on whatever you're using, you don't have to go into the options to change it. So let's say that you receive a disc that has 20% shrinkage. You can now put in 20% in the shrinkage rate, and it will automatically convert it to 1.25, or vice versa, depending on how your system is set up to. So default support pin parameters. So this is what I was talking about when you go to Control D and you go to object types. If you right click on, like, for example, this one was provisional bridge, you have a couple different options in the drop down here. You need to set this to yes, insertion on an equator curve, and when you do, it's going to utilize these parameters that are under the supports in the Control-Alt-7 menu in the settings, okay, in the preferences. Object selection toolbar. This is a new menu that's in the Control-Alt-7 menu as well. I think this is under interface. So depending on your object type, you can display these as additional tools. So when you select the object and you hit the little wrench and the hammer, you can say, okay, for bridges, maybe for full contour bridge, framework bridge, and provisional bridge, I want to add the option for stabilizer. So that way, when you click on the part, you can just click on the tool, go to stabilizer, instead of having to go to tools and then click on stabilizer, then click on your part. It's just a different workflow. Some people find it more convenient to access this way. Equipment, fixture, and transparency. So essentially from here, what we've done is whenever the fixture gets in the middle of your view between you and the part, it automatically turns it transparent, just to make it a little bit more easy and convenient to work with. Stabilizer transparency, we've done the same thing with this as well. So when you're working with a support pin that overlaps a stabilizer, we turn that transparent automatically, just to give you better access to be able to see where you're placing your support pin. Stock management. So like if you add a new stock size in your stock library, it automatically drops that down to the bottom of the list. Now when we click on the column, you can sort by material name, and it quickly sorts all of your stock together. So it's easier to find things now. Makes it a little bit easier to organize as well. Partially used stock color. It used to be rendered in red. Now we just show that as a transparent space. That also just makes it a little bit easier, so that way if you're working with like multi-layer or something like that, the red color in the past would typically interfere with the view, so it's a little bit easier to see now. Smart sorting of blanks by percentage. So this is a 2018 feature as well. When you're looking at your partially used stock, you'll notice that there's a percentage free column here now, and it shows us how much material is free in each used disc, and we automatically sort by the disc that has the most space available at the top. So updated license information. So when you go into when you right click at the title bar, you go down to support, you can now see whether or not you have the comfort or advanced pack enabled. Also your license, here is where your dongle number typically is located, and in parentheses will be the year of licensing annual maintenance that you have. So if you have a 2016 license and you try to run a 2017 version of Millbox, it's going to say dongle not found, right? Because you don't have that maintenance. If this matches with this year, then it can run that. Or for example, if this is 2018, I could run a 2017 version, no problem. So we also have a 180 degree rotation feature that we've implemented. Essentially double clicking this rotation icon will rotate the part 180 degrees. This can be useful for 4-axis machines mostly, because for example on this bridge it has 2 insertions. So when you have a part that has 2 insertion directions on a 4-axis machine, we lock the rotation automatically because it only has 4 axes, so it can only mill those 2 insertions from one orientation or the other orientation, 1 or 180. So this wouldn't really be useful for the 5-axis side, but if you have a 4-axis, you can flip it easily. Yeah. Angulation of support pins. So now if you do want to change the angulation of the support pins, if you go to the side profile, you can click and drag this up or down to change how it engages with the stabilizer or with the stock in general. So. Okay, so now we get into the comfort mode, and so again, the general idea is that the comfort mode is not required for the workflow. Neither the advanced mode is not required for the workflow, but it's going to help you save time. So a good example of this is when you're importing your STL files. We can now we use smart filtering of the STL files. So in the file name down here, you can start typing either the file name itself or a small portion of the file name, and automatically will sort and only show you the objects that match with this. So you can see I typed in for you, and you can see it only displays those two bridges that have for you in the file name. But if I typed in bridge instead, these two would still show up, and maybe some others that have bridge in the file name somewhere. So we check the entire file name, not just the perfect match. Webcam or machine live view. So if you have the cam in one room and maybe the machine in a different room, and you want to have a live view of what's going on in the machine at all times, we now integrate directly into Millbox. So this is actually in the background of Millbox, and we can, as long as the webcam's plugged into the computer, we automatically recognize that, and you can select from multiple, even if you have multiple webcams. This one we just disabled the visualization of undercuts on where the support pin connects to the part, because it was just more or less an inaccuracy. Okay. Queue to import of STL files. This is definitely a big one. So if you're even a small size lab, if you're handling 20 or 30 restorations a day, but maybe you're nesting 20 of those at a time, this can save you a lot of time during the import process. So without the comfort mode, normally when you import your STL files, let's say that I select 3 STL files, I have to when I select the check mark, or I select to import those, it loads one and then does all of its recognition, maybe takes anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds, loads the next one, still the same process, and then loads the third one, and then it's done. While it's doing this, the interface is completely locked, so I can't go and navigate to other files, I can't import or queue up any other files. So the queued import allows me to, typically, for example, if I had like one full arch case, and then I had maybe 2 single units that I wanted to nest in the same job, I would personally start with the larger STL, and I would queue the import for that. So that way, while it's importing, I can still navigate, and the interface is unlocked for me to go in and select the other files, queue those up as well. And it can actually import 3 at a time, but you can queue up as many as you want. So the performance of this feature scales with the CPU or the processor on the computer. So for example, I can import 10 STL files in the time that previously, or I can import 10 in the time it would take me to do 3 without this feature. Additional information for project management. This is another comfort feature. So whenever we're pulling in a file in the normal mode, we only have the size, the type of file, date modified, and the job name. So with the comfort mode, we can also display things like machine name, material, blank name, lot code, and whether or not the toolpath was calculated. So we know if it was a file that we were just playing with or a file that we actually ran for production. Makes it a little bit easier to sort through that. We also have this little magnifying glass here. So when you select this, it'll pull up the select filter, and basically you can search by object name. So if there's an STL file name that you know, or a portion of the STL file name, you can select this, put your file name in, and it will show only jobs where that STL file was nested. So yeah, this feature is nice though. You wouldn't have to name it by machine, because obviously everything would automatically be laid out. You could search by objects for files. You could search by the blank, so that way you can see all the jobs that you used or milled in this particular blank. This is really nice because if you have if you're trying to trace down parts that are related to a particular disk, this can kind of help you narrow that down as well. You can also filter by machine, so you can see all jobs milled out for a particular machine. And you can say only display the machines that are available, so machines that are turned on in your installer. Because now, for example, if you install the IMUS edition, it has all these different machines in the list. If you decide that okay, a machine's no longer working, so when you click new job, you don't want to have that displayed, you can go into the options and there's a checkbox under the machine configuration to just hide the machine, so you don't have to remove it entirely from the configuration. And then that way, later, when maybe the machine gets repaired, comes back into production, you can go in and just uncheck it, and then you can see it and use it again. It's a lot easier. And then if you want these filters to apply every time, you go to open up the open job function, then you just put a check down here and apply filter on next open, and it will automatically apply those filters for you. We give a little bit more information in the job information, so we can click on job management. This window that pops up, you're going to have some additional info here, like the machine name, STL files, and this can all be customized. You can put in the machine name, the material type. Job report settings. We have some additional parameters here now on the comfort that give you a little bit more flexibility with the job report. So you can highlight specific curves, which would be like the engraving codes, because sometimes the engraving code is a little bit hard to read. So if you select to highlight those areas, then it will just make it a little bit bold, a little bit more bold, a little bit easier to read on the job report. Also, if you set like the thickness of a number, for example, or for the lines, because you know how we draw lines in between the parts. If you set it to 0, it just won't display those, because some people don't like to have the lines on the image. They just want the image. So it just kind of depends. Shortcut key to quickly rotate along the A-axis. So F9 is a new shortcut key that'll just simply rotate from 0 to 180 degrees. We also have the capability now to change machine once you've started with a file. So if you get to the end of the process and you realize that you need to select a slightly different tool profile, you can change it. You can't change from like a 350 to a 450 or for 350 to a 650. It's only for tool profiles. So in the future, if you use 2 different tool configurations, like where you have some tools that have longer geometries, so it can reach into the access hole, then you could potentially have 2 different tool profiles. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about when I say tool profiles? Okay, so when you start the new job, there's that little button there, then you can select different tool manufacturers. We use it on the roll-in for different tool manufacturers, but you can use it for a vast array of different things. So this just allows you to change it between those. And we've gone from now the comfort to the advanced mode. So now we're talking about advanced mode features. Comfort and advanced were just introduced this year, so there's not a whole lot of features in there today. However, you can see some of the features that are in there are definitely very useful in terms of production-wise. So now you're going to see this is more for larger milling centers, things like that, where you have to have a lot more flexibility. Copy and paste. So if you're working on a project for an expo, or maybe you're doing quality assurance, so you're milling out 10 or 20 of one part, you can get your part oriented just like you want. So you can rotate if you need to rotate in sizels, maybe do the multi-layer or something like that, you can do all of that. You can place your support pins exactly where you want them, and then you can just simply select that part and then hit copy and paste, and it'll ask you how many clones you want to make. So let's say you make 10, it will clone that 10 times and put them in the disk, but it carries over all that information, rotation, the placement of the support pins, so it saves you a lot of time. Changing screw hole direction. So this is an advanced feature which if you have an angulated screw axis channel, you can use this feature. So you would select the curve that you want to rotate, and then you get this little green widget that you can then click and drag to rotate and change the angle. As you rotate and change the angle, it will automatically bow out the internal portion of that. On the advanced mode also, so now we can move the bridge stabilizer, that center portion. So depending on your curve of Wilson, curve of Spee, of course, you may have a different curvature to the arch, and sometimes the stabilizer exactly. And sometimes the stabilizer doesn't always it puts it right in the middle, right, of the disc, and sometimes you need to move it up or down. This allows you to do that. We also have custom stabilizers as well. I don't know if I have I think I do. It's probably in the PowerPoint somewhere. But in the options, you can go in, and if you have a specific CAD geometry that you want to design that you think works best, it can even scale with the part as well. You can import that as an STL and then use that as a stabilizer, any custom design. This is also an advanced feature, thickness mapping. So when you select the part and select the thickness mapping tool, it automatically calculates the thickness, and then we'll display that on the internal prep area. You can also hit the F9 key so you can kind of see all around where thin or thick or thin areas may be. This is a good production tool, so that way, you know, if you have a customer that maybe is notorious for sending you restorations that are below the minimum thickness, because sometimes it's very easy in the CAD to design a crown and you see that there's no hole there, but in reality the thickness is maybe, you know, 0.01 millimeters. So when it goes to mill, it has a hole, right? This will help you kind of identify those areas. And you can also set in the settings, you can set different thickness thresholds by material. Those are, today as it exists, those are the comfort and advanced features. And that essentially, again, they're add-on modules for Millbox. As you can see, everything that was in there is not required to get through the workflow. There's nothing required there, but they're tools that can help you get through that workflow easier, or give you some additional flexibility in some very complex cases where you may need to do that. They're sold separate, but you can buy them both. You know, you can choose either or both if you want. So, yeah.